back to tonight's Big Picture Rumble. Still with me, Scott Greer, Sam Bennett, and Horace Cooper. Let's get back to it. Just 1 week after the Supreme Court heard oral arguments in the case Whole Woman's Health versus Hellerstedt, and Florida just passed its own massive anti-women's health bill. The bill in Florida is remarkably similar to the Texas ban, and even though the argument in support of the bill is slightly different from the Texas law, the end effect will be practically the same. This is just another way for big government Republicans to make it impossible for women to get an abortion. Brent Baer asked Bernie Sanders if he ever thought there was a circumstance when abortion should be illegal.
It's not a question of me being okay. Thank you for the question, Brett. I happen to believe, and let me be very clear about it, I know not everybody here will agree with me. I happen to believe that it is wrong for the government to be telling a woman what to do with her own body.
So why are so-called small government Republicans trying to tell women in Florida and Texas and beyond that they can't get abortions, trying to make it impossible for a woman to exercise their 14th, 4th, and 9th Amendment rights?
That's right.
Why?
Well, as a token woman here, I'd love to just dive on this, all right?
No token.
What I find unfathomable, right, is that here we have a nation founded on the principle that nobody can knock on your door, haul you out of your bed, and throw you in a jail. That's how the U.S. Constitution was built. And so here we have the grand old party that I used to be a member of, right, a proud member of. Tom's rolling over in his grave over here.
I went door to door for Barry Goldwater in '64,
but I left that party because I saw this ever-increasing legislation that was antithesis not only to the U.S. Constitution, but also to the very foundation upon which the Grand Old Party was founded, which is little government, as little government as you need to function correctly. And to add irony to irony, it was a Republican, it was Richard Nixon that passed Title X legislation because giving women access, all women access to birth control and giving women access to basic health will result in fewer unwanted pregnancies, lower costs for government. That's why it was all passed in the first place. How we ever ended up here is beyond me.
Horace?
Okay, so I've said on your program once, and I'll say it again. I would like to do to the butchers that kill the unborn the same thing. You're interrupting me now. The same thing.
I will interrupt you when you say something that offensive. I will. That is offensive.
You're going to have to deal with that.
That is offensive.
Whatever you think of this microaggression.
Let
me make my point. Let me make my point.
I'm not going to, because you're pointing
Let me make my point.
Do you want women dying in septic wards?
Do you want me to speak over you?
Well, listen, you did it too. You want women dying in septic wards, which is why Roe versus Wade was passed in the first place.
That is not why Roe v. Wade was passed in the first place.
It was exactly why it was passed.
I actually taught constitutional law, and I know exactly the history of it, and that is exactly not the history of it.
That is exactly
This was activism on the part of the court where people were setting their own record for being an idea of how you get in the history books for creating these rights out of whole cloth. But that's not the point. I want to do to the butchers that kill the unborn what you want to do to Walmart.
This is incredibly
I will regulate them. I will inspect them.
What's Walmart?
I will insist on higher tax rates, every single thing to do. You believe that what Walmart is doing, they shouldn't be doing. I believe these butchers that kill the unborn should not be doing that, because that is what they do.
That is offensive.
That is exactly what they do.
Oh, so you want Walmart, who basically they pay their employees so little that they have to be subsidized by the government. So basically, Walmart is on corporate welfare. Let's talk about that for a second. But do not call them butchers, because you know what? My aunts,
that is exactly what they are.
No, that is not correct. My aunts, my Republican aunts, who are the bastion of the Republican Party in New Jersey, and they're all nurses. They're all Republican. They were the ones that watched young women dying in septic wards like flies across the country. And it was actually New York State that passed the first law to make it legalized abortion. Why? Because we didn't want women abortions are going to happen whether it's legal or not. But what we want is we don't want women, particularly young women, dying because they try to do that procedure to themselves.
No, the only people
I do want to ask one question about this.
Are the people that don't have a choice in the matter. Those are the
people
you want to have.
There is one question to ask about this. Are these state laws going to leave women dying in these septic wards? What is going to? I mean, it's not outlawing abortion completely.
So you want to take one of the most renowned economists of our age, right, from the University of Chicago, Freakonomics author, he pointed out, and I'm probably going to end my political career at this point, but he pointed out that the dramatic decrease in crime that this nation experienced that no one could explain exactly tracked with the passage of Roe versus Wade. What's going to happen
But
is
none
you're
of
going
these
to have
state laws are completely outlawing. None of these laws are completely outlawing abortion.
No, but listen, if in
I mean, they're
Texas-
restricting and
if
regulating.
you're restricted, if I'm a poor mother who's basically trying to make a living on minimum wage that Walmart pays her, and I've got 3 children already, right, that I can barely afford, I'm trying to keep my head above water, I find myself pregnant again, and I have no place to leave my children, I don't have the money for the gas fare to drive 200 miles with a 48 to 72 waiting period before I arrive there.
Off dead. Those unborn children are better off dead.
Oh,
That's exactly your argument.
You're saying the mother is better off
and by
dead
the
when she
way,
tries
under
to do
my
the abortion by herself.
assessment, the
Oh, my
people that
God.
work at these butcheries would be
Will you
paid at
stop
a better
using
rate.
that offensive
They're
term?
the ones that are also being
You are
exploited.
offensive.
I'm sorry that
is
offends you. It
offensive.
happens to be the truth.
It is not the truth. It is
happens to be
offensive.
the truth.
It
These
is
places,
not the truth. It
These
is
places
offensive.
exist for the purpose
86
of terminating the lives of innocent people.
86% of the American public, including Roman Catholics, believe the abortion should be between a woman,
Why are
her
they
doctor,
getting these
and her
laws passed?
God.
Why are they getting these laws passed in Florida?
you
Why
know
are they
what?
getting these
I'll tell
laws
you
passed
why.
in Kansas?
Because
All across the
I'll
country.
tell you why. Because the United States is ranked 86 among all nations in the number of women in elected office. Our country is run by a bunch of old white men who do not know what they're talking about. And if we simply had more women in elected office, it's not even
for this
sexism,
cause
it is
typically are
cluelessness.
women.
Our laws, no, that is absolutely
And in
correct.
the Republican Party,
Absolutely
the
correct.
most likely pro-life activist is a female. This is
Absolutely
exactly
correct.
the case.
Absolutely correct.
And the reality is...
If Horace was able to get pregnant, abortion would be a
Thank
sacrament.
you. And you know what? And
Oh, please.
so
That's just
Viagra,
so trite.
Viagra is very accessible. It's underwritten by insurance, and a woman can't get basic health birth control in many states. Thank you.
Okay. Scott, you're done with this too. We'll move along.
I mean, they covered everything.
Okay. In the Democratic debate in Miami on Wednesday, Maria Elena Salinas asked Bernie Sanders about his past characterizations of Fidel Castro and Daniel Ortega.
Senator, in retrospect, have you ever regretted the characterizations that you made of Daniel Ortega and Fidel Castro that way?
I'm sorry, please say
In
that.
retrospect, have you ever regretted the characterizations of Daniel Ortega and Fidel Castro that you made in 1985?
The key issue here was whether the United States should go around overthrowing small Latin American countries.
You didn't
I
answer
think
the
that
question.
was a mistake.
It obviously doesn't look good, but Bernie was really only commending the Cuban healthcare system and education system. On the other hand, Hillary Clinton boasts about her relationship with Henry Kissinger, who is a war criminal with plenty of blood on his hands. And Ted Cruz had this to say about Abdel Fattah el-Sisi of Egypt.
Let me give you an example of a Muslim, for example, we ought to be standing with. President al-Sisi of Egypt, a president of a Muslim country who is targeting radical Islamic terrorists. He's hunting them down and stopping them.
El-Sisi has, quote, presided over the flagrant abuse of human rights since taking office, according to Human Rights Watch. So with Clinton praising Kissinger and Cruz praising el-Sisi, why is it so offensive that Sanders commends Cuba's healthcare system?
Well, he was commending the Castro brothers, particularly for their policy. I mean, it's like, oh, they have great
For
healthcare and
education
education, but they're war criminals. They've committed all these human rights atrocities.
That's
I mean,
not
Henry
war criminals,
Kissinger.
that's dictators.
Well, I mean, they did have a civil war, and they executed the losers. I mean, they were in some ways war criminals as well. But, I mean, what you have to say is Henry Kissinger never ordered the execution of thousands of people like the Castro brothers did, and Che Guevara and all their other henchmen. Really? Yes, really. And al-Sisi,
husband was murdered in East Timor.
Order it? Did he directly order it?
Because of Henry Kissinger's policies.
He did not directly order that.
He provoked a war.
And the Castro brothers took Cuba straight into the gutter. Now, the Batista government, of course, was harsh and brutal, but the Castros made Cuba even worse than the Batista government. And even al-Sisi took out.
Know that?
How do I know that? But you have to look at Cuba.
Reports.
Cuba was actually getting serious investments from the Western world, and it was actually a profitable country.
Cuba had some pretty terrible poverty, and Batista
It did have terrible poverty, but so did
tortured
other
people.
places.
He murdered
so
people.
there are other places in the third world that now seeing increased development, but Cuba still has terrible poverty under a communist regime.
Okay, so we're
al-Sisi,
still not.
Al-Sisi took the,
Nobody is answering my question, which is why do we Why do we have this double standard that we all hate the Castros for being dictators, but we have no problem with the dictators that we have installed, whether it's the Shah of Iran, whether it was Saddam Hussein, who we installed.
If I can just say, Tom, you just answered the question. It's all about optics, right? So Sanders is basically kind of bravely, I would say, I'm a Hillary person through and through, but I think, you know, Sanders is being very brave. He's saying, come on, guys, you know, in essence, and he's going against flying in the face of what sort of standard acceptable ways to talk about things, right? Whereas, quite frankly, Clinton is sort of defaulting to Kissinger's sort of put on a pedestal. She uses his praise of her stint as a Secretary of State as sort of her qualification badge. To be honest, again, I'm not a Sanders person, but I think Sanders was being a little brave there, and I think Clinton was being, not pandering, but sort of playing into how the safe way.
Well, and it was in Miami.
Yeah.
Well, I agree with
Horace.
Scott. I mean, the record of these killers and the destruction that they have created during their leadership and that they plan to pass on is something that we shouldn't be in support of.
In the Western Hemisphere.
Pardon me?
In the Western Hemisphere.
No.
I'm asking a question. In the Western Hemisphere, do you think that left-wing dictators like the Castro brothers and arguably Hugo Chavez, you know, versus right-wing dictators like Pinochet and whatnot, who has killed more people? It seems to me, I mean, I think if you add up the total over the last 50 or 80 years, at least during my lifetime, which is not 80 years, but if you add up the total, it sure seems to me like the right-wingers have killed a lot more people than the left-wingers, and we're the ones who keep putting them into power. In El Salvador, in Guatemala, in Honduras, it's still ongoing. You know, in Chile, in Argentina, in Brazil for a little while, and you know.
Tom, as you know, a lot of the conflict in South America and Latin America have been proxy wars. And the reason that these countries, like Cuba, are the problem that they are is that they operate as foot soldiers for our enemies. They operate with the former Soviet Union. They presently operate with North Korea. I said the former Soviet Union. They operate presently with the crazy over in North Korea. There are still ongoing efforts on their part
they're working with us right now.
They are not.
They
just
are.
actually
Obama's
said,
visiting Cuba next week.
Yes, they said we're going to visit and we're not making any changes,
Anyway,
and you're going to have to accept that.
We're out of time. Horace, Sam, Scott, thank you all for being with us tonight.